So hello everyone, my name is Mark Kelleher and I'm currently working as a research assistant at Maroi, and what I'll do today is I'm presenting my work. So just to give an introduction, I work as a research assistant at Maroi, collaborating with the Department of Economics. I won't be able to make the webinar, so I'm sending in this recording of my work. I suppose we're working as part of Workpackage 9, me and my supervisors and myself, and I will share my work briefly today. So please forgive me if I'm covering ground that's already been treaded. But what we're really interested in Workpackage 9 is how the sector can flourish and continue to do so. We'll be doing things like collating data about what's happening, researching what's happening in the sector, finding the challenges, informing policymakers of these challenges, and hopefully at the end we'll be able to contribute to our understanding of innovation economics and economics in general. It's quite useful to think about the challenges firms face in developing ORE devices. The primary issue we see it as knowledge, trying to exchange knowledge, because to create an ORE device you need lots of diversified types of knowledge. That can be quite difficult to share. So any way that we can improve the sharing and understand the sharing firstly, then we can improve it, and that should enhance innovation outcomes in the sector. Finance is deemed to be an enormous issue for firms, because to develop an ORE device requires up to many millions of euros, pounds, dollars, whatever currency you want to use, and significantly it takes a long time before those revenues begin to arrive, and the costs continue to increase into the development just before commercialization and revenue can arrive. Finally, regulation is an issue, red tape. Of course, red tape is necessary to ensure that these devices are safe and they're not going to harm the environment. But it's about finding the optimum level of regulation, and too much regulation can hamper development in the sector. So to begin to understand these questions, there was a survey. We conducted a survey. A lot of this work was done by earlier members of Workpackage 9. Existing data sets such as the Community Innovation Survey feature too little ORE representation, so we had to make our own. The idea is to get a snapshot of the sector. Questions such as, do you innovate, who do you collaborate with, and what's your opinion on X policy for the sector? The survey revealed 227 responses and received 227 responses, and about 4/5 of firms are deemed to innovate, and there's a lot of variety in terms of where firms innovate, who their innovations partners are. So for industry, it's close to 2/3 interactive industry, well around 1/3 interactive government, and it's almost precisely half interactive universities. I'm sure that's what SELKIE will be trying to improve. So just a bit on our study. I've been working on this for the past 8 months with my supervisors, Gillian Barrett, Frank Crowley, and Justin Doran. And the idea is that we're going to explore different innovation stages, research, development, and commercialization stages, and triple helix interactions in the offshore marine sector. Don't worry if you don't understand what that means. I'll explain it to you now as best I can. This is probably the busiest slide in the whole presentation, so please bear with me. But basically, to begin to understand innovation, we have to think about how firms innovate, and the chain link model is a great way of doing that. So if we take the example of a tidal device, firms begin with a potential market. So this may be a country or a utility, or maybe even a small island. Some people have said, a remote island that needs power. And what they'll do is they'll invent a device. They'll I suppose begin to design the device and test the device and scale it up. They'll redesign it based on that feedback, and then finally they'll distribute it and market it to the wider world. So it's important to note these kind of feedback loops. So the idea of the feedback loops is that the innovation isn't linear, that difficulties can occur, and that in a redesign they may realize that they have to go back and invent something new, for example. How firms innovate? Well, they'll use knowledge that's out there, and they'll use this knowledge resource. If this knowledge doesn't exist, they'll have to conduct research somehow to create new knowledge. And the chain link model is just one example of how firms innovate. However, there are lots of other different ways firms innovate as well, including or how firms have been modeled to innovate, such as the innovation value chain and the 3-stage model by Davids and Franken. But underlying how we think about how firms innovate is we apply a resource-based view of the firm. Suggests the firm kind of travels its innovation path possessing a bundle of resources that are kind of tangible and intangible. So a tangible resource would be understanding how water moves as a result of the tides, but an intangible resource would be the ability to then apply that knowledge to an RE device successfully. What's crucial to note is that this knowledge resource may lie within the firm, but if it does not, then it will be necessary for the firm to reach out externally and speak to the literature and experts as well, and maybe experts if the literature cannot provide an answer. So this brings us on to triple helix. Before we get into what the triple helix is, it's important to note that external interactions and open collaborative culture can be integral to a firm's innovation strategy. So what this means is that a firm can choose to choose or maybe necessary for a firm to obtain the kind of knowledge from outside, and this is kind of what I was trying to get at earlier with knowledge sharing. The more effective knowledge sharing occurs, the more effective innovation can occur. This has especially been noted as crucial for the RE sector. And how the triple helix is modeling external interactions, it's kind of similar to how the chain link model looks at innovation. It's just a way of thinking about how innovation happens. Triple helix is a way how external interactions happen, and just basically posits that industry, academia, and government will work together using their own individual strengths to best enhance innovation outcomes. So what we propose is kind of bridging these two theories together of how firms innovate and external interactions. And I suppose we came up then with the core question: how are different external actors important at different stages of the innovation process? What we propose, I suppose, is there's kind of 3 stages of innovation: research, development, and commercialization. And here a firm will reach out, depending on the stage they're at, to different actors to try to obtain or try to influence certain different things. So it's quite useful as well. I'm using the word useful a lot. To, I suppose, imagine what a firm actually looks like at the different stages of innovation. So firms at research stage are small firms, they're doing R&D, and a critical need for kind of basic analytical knowledge, which is knowledge that's kind of easily captured or codified, i.e. underlying science. And where is this underlying science created? It's created in universities, which is why we believe firms at the research stage will want to interact with universities the most. It will also be important probably to interact with other industry to kind of absorb their information, and as well it's important to interact with government potentially to obtain some finance, but at this stage firms' costs are relatively low. However, firms at the development stage, the makeup of the firm has changed slightly. They probably have a couple of more employees, but they're facing enormous costs in developing their prototypes. The costs increase exponentially for as one progresses with the development of a device, which is why government and university are swapped, because the idea is that firms really need money, but there's still quite a high risk in development, and only government can kind of provide that role and take on that risk. Industry will also play a role in terms of interaction with different industry actors, probably less important compared to the first stage. University may also have a niche role to play. And finally, firms at the commercialization stage are internal revenue generating firms, which means that they're able to generate the revenue from their own activities and from selling their products. And I suppose they're focused on optimizing their products, making them as cheap and efficient as possible, and trying to increase their sales as well. However, at this stage, we believe that government and university don't really have a role to play, and that's more around industry that's important. So how do we actually investigate these? Our research is based upon sequential explanatory mixed methods analysis, which basically means that we start off by crunching the numbers, and then we go on and talk to actors in this space, I suppose, to reflect upon our numbers and see how accurate we are in them. So beginning with quantitative analysis, we use the survey spoken about earlier, and here we have our dependent variables here. So really what we're trying to guess or get at is the predict. We're trying to predict is the word, and we're trying to predict the probability of industry, university, or government interaction. We've 6 different types of industry. This because industry is quite heterogeneous, whereas the university interaction is quite homogeneous. Your own interaction, it's far more narrower type of sector. Government is somewhere in between, but we decide to just aggregate government interaction into just one variable. Secondly, we have our independent variables. So the idea is that firms are at different stages, and based on these stages, we're going to predict who they're interacting with. We predict what stage they're at themselves using a concept known as technological readiness levels. This was first used by NASA, but I suppose it's been applied now to other industries as well. It's quite useful for engineering-based industries, such as ORI. And basically, TRLs go from 1 to 9. I suppose a good way of thinking about this is if we think about a tidal device. If a company is at TRL 1, it means that they just have the basic knowledge that they understand how water flows in the ocean, and TRL 9 will be they'll have a fully functioning tidal device producing energy into the grid. So these are the results of our regressions. We have 3 stages of regression, so I suppose I'll be going back and forth a bit between this slide. So if we look at our first hypothesis, it was that firms operate at a research stage. They're going to be interacting with universities. We find that's the case. They also do significant amount of industry interactions, I suppose, across different industry sectors as well. We find that government aren't significant. Secondly, we move on to late stage. So we find that firms will need to interact with government and industry as well, and maybe university. So we find that government is highly supported. Industry is also supported as well. We can see maybe the variety of industry actors is less important. And universities also have a role to play, probably around kind of niche concepts such as numerical modeling or niche uses. And finally, we have the sales. So this is that only industry interaction is important at this stage, and that's what we find. We find suppliers are very important, which makes sense that, you know, the more money you're putting into your suppliers in terms of the more expensive and larger your devices are as you work your way up through prototypes, the supplier becomes more important in terms of optimizing costs. Obviously, at the earlier stages, clients aren't there, but now when a company is fully established, their clients are there and they can work with them as well to optimize their own device. So indeed, so we find pretty much that all our hypotheses are supported. However, our regression is fantastic. It shows us who's interacting with who, but it doesn't actually reveal what's going on underneath the surface. It doesn't reveal how do these companies innovate, why do they actually interact with their partners, and kind of there's still things around TRL and finance which need to be explored. So for the qualitative analysis, we conducted interviews with 35 actors across government, industry, and university. Helices. The analysis of these 35 interviews provided clear support for our quantitative findings. However, there was over 25 hours of footage. There was a lot of different perspectives we took in it, but as we are focused on understanding how firms develop products, we decided to just apply our analysis only to kind of developers. So looking at the developers, we came up with a summary of themes, what kind of came out from the developer interviews specifically. So when developers speak about industry, why do they interact with industry? Well, they're seeking that diversified and tacit knowledge that I spoke about earlier. You know, they need to get different types of knowledge, and only industry can provide that. However, there are issues with asymmetric information. So this meant that ORI developers would often interact with firms who wouldn't know the specifics about developing ORI devices, and that firm size could also impact flexibility. So if a small ORI developer was interacting with a large firm, flexibility of that large firm to there's a word supposed to be able to accommodate the needs of the firm would be limited. In terms of interacting with universities, it's to kind of gain that critical knowledge source, that basic knowledge, I suppose through academic papers, through tank testing and other things like that. However, there can be misaligned timelines. So if and these could best explain through quotes. So I suppose one actor noted that, you know, if they want to start a project in April, for example, all the PhDs might be starting in September, which means that, you know, that they have to wait 6 months. Universities tend to work term to term. There can also be differing objectives between universities and governments, universities and developers. So And again, illustrated best through a quote. One developer said, "We want to address the engineering as quickly as possible, improve the engineering." The other academics, they just want to publish papers, and they're not really the same thing. In terms of industry and developers interacting with government, the primary reason why they interact is for finance. And also regulation is a secondary issue. Issues with interaction with government are the speed of interaction with government. They can be quite slow to reply, and as well there can be significant bureaucracy in interacting with governments, different levels of bureaucracy, lots of different forms to fill out for funding applications, for example. So I suppose to best illustrate this, we'll take a case study. So we chose KC, who are operated TRL7. They're a tidal energy company founded in 2008, and they have 25 employees. Why do they interact with industry? That's actually to get the diversifying tasks and knowledge I spoke about previously, but sometimes there's a lack of understanding of the rigors of ocean energy. So a quote from them: "When we were at sea, we were not able to intervene, and we want the system to work standalone for 2 or 3 years without human interaction." Sometimes this is not well understood when we work with a new manufacturer. For example, if a manufacturer has been working on onshore wind, it's much easier to service onshore wind than it is to service a tidal device that's operating on the sea floor. Why they interact with the university? Well, it's, as we said, they've learned a lot from their interactions. They're trying to get access to that scientific knowledge that they can't get elsewhere. But again, the issues in terms of the term time schedule and showing a lack of flexibility within universities. Why do they speak with government? Well, they're trying to get finance primarily, and they speak with lots of different types of government. In fact, one of the company shareholders is the National Investment Bank. The finance they get from government can also, I suppose, send a signal that to insurers and investors that that what they're doing is worth investing in. However, they're facing issues with bureaucracy from national government, and also they can be faced with an excessive regulatory burden. So a quote from them says, "We were only asking for an authorization of experimentation of 3 years. It's as difficult as having a program for 20 years." And I mean, obviously, 3 years and 20 years are not the same thing. So that's quite an obvious issue that I suppose could be resolved. Taking it all into account, what are the actual takeaways from from our work? Well, it shows that the SELKIE project is the right way of doing things. How can we encourage more interactions? Really, is what we're getting at, because we find that interactions really help enhance innovation outcomes. We're showing that the level of interactions that are going on through our quantitative analysis. We're also showing how actors are interacting and the difficulties doing so through our qualitative analysis. Hopefully, from my presentation today, you'll have learned something, but you might see some of this quite obvious, and it is obvious to insiders, but it's not obvious to people on the outside, for the policymakers, and that's what this paper is for. We hope that our work is exciting enough to get them interested, clear enough that they can understand, and strong enough and evidence-based for them to intervene. Future work, just touch briefly, could incorporate the quadruple helix. So this would include in the role of media and the public in how ORE is viewed, because we find that through our interviews that that public can have a large role to play in innovation. Thank you very much.